And there's a collision. It's caught out of the air.
There are no flags on the field.
Throws it deep downfield. Wide open Tyree, who makes the catch.
The playoffs have given us some amazing stories, Cinderella runs, fantastic flops, and iconic finishes. But what about the teams that never had the chance? Whether it be poorly timed injuries, late season collapses, or the narrowest of tiebreakers, there have been some truly great squads that didn't make the postseason.
Playoffs? Don't talk about it. Playoffs? You kidding me? Playoffs?
Let's get started with the 2008 Patriots.
Sammy Morris is in the backfield now. The fake to him. Brady with time. Hit as he throws the ball. That is complete.
And Tom Brady took a tremendous hit as he released that ball right on his left leg. Patriot Nation right now is holding its collective breath.
A year after going 16-0 in the regular season, New England now had a major hole to fill in Week 1. With Tom Brady out for the year, backup Matt Castle had a full arsenal of talent as the Pats still had the foundation of their undefeated season. But they became just the second team ever to miss out on a wild card spot while posting an 11-5 record. New England took a couple ugly early losses, but Castle and his troops would round into form. Wes Welker was a Pro Bowler with 111 catches and over 1,100 yards. Randy Moss posted yet another 1,000-yard season and hauled in 11 scores. The team boasted the 8th best scoring offense and defense while outpacing their opponents by 100 points.
Far sideline. This one is caught. Randy Moss for the touchdown.
Belichick's squad won their final 4 games and 5 of their last 6. This included a 47-7 demolition of the eventual NFC champion Cardinals in Week 16. Still, it wasn't enough as tiebreakers lifted both the division-winning Dolphins and the Ravens into the playoffs instead. The 2012 Bears got off to a blistering start behind a hard-nosed defense. Brian Urlacher and company finished 3rd in scoring and 5th in yards allowed. They crushed the Colts in the season opener, blew out the Jags 41-3, and steamrolled Tennessee 51-20 in Week 9. At 7-1, they were arguably football's most complete team. Brandon Marshall earned All-Pro honors, setting a franchise record with over 1,500 receiving yards, as did cornerback Charles Tillman, whose peanut punch helped him put on one of the best defensive displays in recent memory.
The middle of the field, and the catch is made, the ball is loose. And Johnson out of the backfield, and now he loses the ball. Look at Tillman. 3 straight punches.
Strip by Tillman. Unbelievable.
But in the second half of the season, their scoring fell off a cliff. The Jay Cutler-led offense averaged just 14 points per game as Chicago lost 5 out of its next 6 games. The Bears righted the ship with 2 wins to finish out the year, but a Week 14 loss to Minnesota was the difference. The Vikings narrowly beat them out for a wild card berth. Speaking of, the 1986 Vikings had that it factor. They were widely considered a team you didn't want to face come January. With a top 5 scoring offense and defense, Minnesota was a legit powerhouse, winning 8 games by 13-plus points. The offense was led by Pro Bowl tight end Steve Jordan and a career year from veteran quarterback Tommy Kramer.
Dropping back to pass on 2nd and 20 as Kramer steps up into the pocket, throws on the move. He's got Jordan inside the 5. He goes to the goal line. Touchdown, Vikings!
Meanwhile, the defense boasted Pro Bowl safety Joey Browner and pass rusher Keith Millard, who tallied a team-high 10.5 sacks. The Vikes racked up several impressive wins, beating Bill Walsh's Niners and a 14-2 Bears team. Minnesota started 5-2 but drew a brutal slate of matchups down the stretch. They played the 12-4 Browns, the 10-6 Bengals, a 12-4 Washington squad, and the eventual champion Giants. They lost all 4 of those games by a total of 15 points. Despite that gauntlet, the Vikings rounded out the season winning 3 of 4, good enough for 9-7, but not good enough for the postseason as the 10-6 Rams earned the final wild card spot. But the very next year, Minnesota pulled off a playoff stunner, upsetting the 49ers and nearly reaching Super Bowl 22. Staying in 1986, we have the Seahawks, who were in an absolutely loaded AFC. 7 different teams won at least 10 games, and Chuck Knox's squad was left on the chopping block. Despite drawing one of the toughest schedules, Seattle put together some very solid wins and individual performances.
Here's the toss to Warner from the 40-yard line, takes off over left guard to the 45 to the 50, breaks into the secondary. One man to beat, and he beats him. He's on his way. Goodbye, Denver. Touchdown, Seahawks. Kurt Warner.
Running back Kurt Warner racked up over 1,400 rushing yards and 13 scores, while Hall of Famer Steve Largent tallied his 8th 1,000-yard season. Both were Pro Bowlers alongside defensive end Jacob Green. But with such stiff competition, the Hawks had little room for error.
Drake back to throws, pressured in the end zone, loses the ball. Eddie Edwards falls on a touchdown.
They scored fewer than 10 points per contest in a 4-game losing skid halfway through the year. Seattle won 5 straight to close out the season, but the damage was done. The Jets and Chiefs made the playoffs instead, and neither made it past the divisional round. In 2004, the Bills quietly put together a stellar campaign. After going just 6-10 in the season before, Buffalo generated an impressive turnaround predicated on defense. They allowed the 2nd fewest total yards and 8th fewest points, all while forcing the most turnovers.
Blitzers align. Here they come. The ball is screened, intercepted by Takeo Spikes, and he's in for a touchdown.
The defense was loaded with 4 Pro Bowlers, including All-Pro linebacker Takeo Spikes, and oh yeah, they led the league in special teams touchdowns too.
High into the air, and McGee retreating into his end zone, 7 yards deep, he brings it out. Terrence McGee to the 10, up to the 15, got a big crease, to the 25, to the 30, up to the 40-yard line. He's going to go all the way.
Go.
McGee at the 40, at the Dolphins 30, down to the 20, the 10, touchdown, Terrence McGee.
Still, their playoff chances looked bleak at first. Mike Mularkey's squad started just 1-5 before flipping the switch. The combination of Willis McGahee, Eric Moulds, and Lee Evans got the job done on offense, especially in the season's second half. The rookie rusher came back from a serious knee injury and piled on the points, scoring all of his 13 touchdowns over the final 10 games. In Week 11, they went into overdrive, winning 6 straight while outscoring opponents by 23 points per game. But the Bills still needed help going into their final game. They needed a win and a Broncos or Jets loss to earn a trip to the playoffs. Instead, Buffalo crumbled, losing to a backup Steelers squad and finishing 9-7. Now, we got to talk about the 91 Eagles. Like the 2008 Pats, Philly was a championship-caliber squad that lost its starting quarterback in Week 1.
Cunningham takes his drop. He pumps. He's going deep down the far side. Incomplete.
Randall's hurt. He got hit on the leg. He's down. Randall Cunningham is down on the field.
Talk about nightmares.
But it didn't impact that defense. Led by Reggie White, this Eagles squad ran laps around the rest of the league, topping the charts in almost every defensive category. They allowed nearly 400 fewer yards than any other team and forced 48 turnovers, tied for league best.
2nd and 10. Mikowski got hit, the ball came loose, and the Eagles have covered it.
Well, it's Reggie White knocking that one loose.
The Minister of Defense headlined a trio of all-pro pass rushers, including Clyde Simmons and Jerome Brown, each amassing at least 9 sacks. Philly blanked the Cowboys 24-0 in Week 3, sacking Troy Aikman an astounding 11 times. But then the offense completely collapsed. Starting in Week 5, the Eagles lost 4 straight, averaging fewer than 7 points per game in that span before hitting their stride. They rebounded to win 7 of their final 8, including victories against the mighty Oilers and eventual champion Washington. But the league exhaled in Week 16 when Dallas got its revenge, eliminating the Eagles from playoff contention.
Takes it at the 15, breaks the coverage, comes across the 25-30, 35-40. He's heading for the end zone. He's gonna go. Kelvin Martin with a touchdown.
How about the Chargers, the team so nice it's listed twice? This 1978 squad is an interesting case, namely because they hired a new coach in Week 4, Don Coryell. Averaging just 15 points in their first 4 games, the Chargers reached new heights with their Air Coryell offense. San Diego averaged 24.5 points per game under their new skipper, finishing the season a blistering 7-1. Behind a spectacular rookie showing from receiver John Jefferson, they boasted the best passing offense in the NFL. Their final 3 games were a show of force. Dan Fouts threw for over 900 yards and 9 touchdowns as they won by an average of 27 points.
Fouts back, setting up. He drills one. Touchdown Chargers!
Their lone loss down the stretch was a head-scratcher against the 4-12 Chiefs, and that loss may have been the difference. While the 9-7 Chargers missed out on the playoffs, the foundation was there. They would go 12-4 in 1979 and make 4 straight postseason appearances. The 2010 Chargers also finished 9-7, but with a much more balanced attack. While the 78 squad made up for poor defense with their passing game, this outfit paced the league on both sides of the ball. Even without LaDainian Tomlinson, the offense was superb, scoring the second most points in the NFL. Phillip Rivers passed for 4,700 yards and 30 touchdowns, while Antonio Gates led the team in receiving.
From midfield, play action. Rivers gets the block and fires. There's a man open left side. Caught! It's Gates! 10-5! Touchdown! San Diego!
Meanwhile, Pro Bowler Sean Phillips and Eric Weddle led a top 10 defensive unit, but then there were the special teams, and San Diego's were very, very bad.
Brown now from 50 to tie it. Brown's kicked it better. Hook in a hurry! It hits the upright!
Several miscues cost the squad a handful of games. Despite winning 7 of their final 9 tilts, they were nowhere near a wild card berth in a loaded AFC. A back-breaking loss to the 4-12 Bengals all but sealed their fate in Week 16. While the 1984 St. Louis Cardinals aren't the best team on this list, they probably came the closest to getting there. It all started with Neil Lomax, who threw for over 4,600 yards, then good for the 4th most ever, and 28 scores in a career year. Fueled by big plays from all-pro receiver Roy Green, the Cardinals were flying high, setting a then-franchise record for yards.
Lomax back to throw. He's going up on top for Roy Green, and Green is there. Touchdown!
St. Louis steamrolled the soon-to-be legendary Bears and picked up impressive wins against division champ Washington and a Giants team that would eke out a wild card spot at their expense. But 1984 was the season of almost for the Cardinals. 6 of their 7 losses were by single digits, including the final defeat, which ended their year in dramatic fashion. In Week 16, with a minute left and no timeouts, the Cardinals were driving just a field goal away from a playoff berth. It came down to the final second.
13 seconds on the clock. They're going to have to hurry. 8 seconds.
They have too many men on the field.
6 seconds. They got him off. He got it off. It's no good.
The Chiefs put together quite a season in 2005, lost among some of the bigger storylines of the early aughts. This outfit is one of the best ever to get snubbed from playoff contention. Topping the league in total offense and yard differential, Dick Vermeil's squad was a certified juggernaut. The duo of Priest Holmes and Larry Johnson was unstoppable, and when Holmes went down, LJ took the Chiefs' backfield and the league by storm. In Week 8, he put the team on his back against the Raiders.
3 tight ends with Dunn in motion. Larry Johnson diving in for the lead, and yes, he got it. And no time remains, and that's it, and Kansas City has won with the extra point in waiting.
Johnson rushed for a staggering 1,750 yards and 20 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Trent Green and Tony Gonzalez connected for Pro Bowl seasons of their own. Kansas City picked up several notable wins, beating playoff-bound Washington before toppling the 10-6 Pats and 13-3 Broncos in back-to-back weeks. The Chiefs were blown out just once in 2005, and they racked up 6 double-digit victories. They won 6 of their final 9 games, but a slow start and a strong AFC left them on the cutting room floor. A late-season loss in the final seconds to the Cowboys did them in.
Bledsoe fakes, swings, hits, Cowboys take the lead.
The Kansas City Chiefs defense sails out to stop the runner.
Rewinding 30 years, we'll briefly touch on the '75 Dolphins. Just 2 seasons removed from their back-to-back Super Bowl titles, Don Shula's team still had gas left in the tank. Miami posted the 6th best scoring offense and 4th best scoring defense. 5 impressive road wins led them to a 7-1 start, but a narrow loss to Houston and injuries to an already depleted roster knocked the Dolphins off course. Franchise legends Larry Zonka, Jim Kick, and Paul Warfield all left in the offseason. Meanwhile, Bob Greasy and Earl Morrall missed extended time, as did 9 defensive starters. Miami went 3-3 down the stretch, losing an OT heartbreaker to the Colts in Week 13.
Gets it down. The kick is up in the air, and it's good!
With only 1 wild card spot up for grabs, Shula and company were on the outside looking in. 10 years later, the league had added an extra playoff spot for each conference, but that still didn't help the '85 Broncos, who were the first 11-5 team in history to miss the postseason. Still, that group was something special. John Elway had arrived, playing all 16 games and throwing for nearly 4,000 yards.
Coming after Elway and can't make the tackle. Elway moves to his left, flinging it long near sideline, wide open, angles back to the 30, 25, and finally McMillan hauls him down at the 5-yard line.
The D was led by All-Pro Carl Mecklenburg and boasted 4 Pro Bowlers. They scored points by committee, but with Elway at the helm, that's all you needed. While the Broncos didn't beat any playoff teams, they only got blown out once by the Chargers before dramatically avenging that loss later in the season.
Tied in overtime at 24. Ball is down. Thomas's kick is blocked. Picked up on the run. Here comes Louis Wright. They won't catch him. He's at the 20. He's at the 15. Score! Broncos block the field goal, run it back and win.
Denver was competitive each and every week and never dropped consecutive games. 4 of their 5 losses came by 4 points or less, including 2 in overtime. Considering their slim defeats and the fact they'd earn a Super Bowl berth the very next year, it's easy to see why this team had potential. For the final stretch, we'll head to the Steel City, the only defending champs on this list. Pittsburgh played well in 2009 and almost always seemed to keep it interesting.
Ben is back. He waits. He looks. He throws it for the near sideline. It's caught in the end zone. Pittsburgh touchdown. A Steelers tie. David Wallace doing the toe drill. Left sideline end zone.
With a championship-tested roster, the Steelers finished 7th in total offense and 5th in defense. Ben Roethlisberger threw for over 4,300 yards, while Santonio Holmes and Hines Ward each posted over 1,100 yards receiving. Meanwhile, a Pro Bowl trio of James Harrison, Lamar Woodley, and Casey Hampton anchored a solid front 7. The black and yellow started the year with impressive wins against playoff-bound Chargers and Vikings, cruising to a 6-2 record. But then the bad breaks started piling up. Troy Polamalu went down for good in Week 10, and a stream of tough losses ensued. The Steelers dropped 5 in a row, including 2 straight in overtime. All these defeats were by just a single score, and 3 of them were against divisional opponents.
There's a snap, it's down, the kick is on its way, that kick by Cundiff is up and good, and Baltimore wins it in overtime.
Big Ben would right the ship with 3 straight wins in the final weeks, but it wasn't enough for the 9-7 Steelers to break out of the pack. Instead, the Ravens, with more division wins, and the Jets, with a better conference record, earned postseason berths. Washington won 3 Super Bowls between 1982 and 1991, but we're looking at a sneaky good squad that didn't even make it to January. The NFC was stacked in 1989 as 7 teams finished with at least 10 wins compared to just 1 in the AFC. Meanwhile, this Washington crew was putting up record-setting numbers. The Posse, wideouts Art Monk, Gary Clark, and Ricky Sanders became the second of 5 trios in history to each have 1,000 receiving yards.
2nd and 10 for the Redskins. Rippon is going deep for Clark. He has his man beaten, and this one he catches. Touchdown, Redskins.
In all, Pro Bowl QB Mark Rippon and company generated 6,253 total yards, a franchise record that stood until 2016. Washington never really got blown out, but did lose a handful of very winnable games. They dropped a strange Monday night game against the Broncos without John Elway, and suffered an inexplicable 10-point loss to the 0-8 Cowboys. Then there was the debacle against the Eagles, up 20-0 in the first quarter and 30-14 at intermission. Washington collapsed in the second half.
Blitz. Cunningham off his back foot. Leaping grab. Touchdown. 2:37. Rip it. Hit. Live ball. Yes. Eagles football.
They lost 4 fumbles while Randall Cunningham connected on 4 second-half touchdowns, including 2 in the final 3 minutes to complete the comeback. Still, Joe Gibbs would guide his troops to 5 straight wins to round out the year. But even with a 10-6 record, the damage was done. Washington couldn't overcome the slow start, and the NFC was just too strong in 1989. The Bengals missed the postseason at 10-4 in 1976, but with 2 legendary teams in their conference and just 1 wild card spot up for grabs, can you blame them? Led by Pro Bowl QB Ken Anderson and All-Pro safety Tommy Casanova, Cincinnati produced the 6th best scoring offense, 7th best defense, and some truly exciting victories.
Anderson back to throw. Cocks his arm once, goes long. There's Curtis. Touchdown.
These guys were legitimate contenders, going 11-3 the previous year. There just wasn't enough room at the top, though. The Bengals only lost to 3 teams in 1976, the 11-3 Colts, the eventual champion Raiders, and twice to the Steelers, who happened to be in the middle of an all-time dynasty. Cincinnati finished with the same record as Pittsburgh, but the latter held a tiebreaker, and the 11-3 Pats snuck in as the wild card instead. Finally, we have the 1991 49ers. Joe Montana missed the entire season with injuries, while Steve Young spent the majority of the year healing as well. But San Francisco still won 10 games and finished among the top 5 in scoring. The main contributor? You probably guessed it.
Going deep, Rice is behind the secondary. He has got it. He holds on. Touchdown 49ers.
This is certainly one of the reasons why it's almost a consensus that the best wide receiver in football is number 80, Jerry Rice.
Jerry Rice could be catching passes from Neil Young and still make the Pro Bowl. The GOAT finished the year with over 1,200 yards and 14 scores. But don't sleep on that San Francisco defense. What they lacked in name recognition, they more than made up for with consistency. This well-oiled machine held teams to 14 points or fewer on 10 separate occasions and ceded over 24 points just once all year. Still, the turning point came in Week 10. The loss featured both an injury to Young and a wild Falcons Hail Mary, a play that would eventually prove to be the difference in the playoff hunt.
This one up for grabs, and Falcons are down there. And the ball is caught! Touchdown! Touchdown, Michael Haynes! Can you believe it?
The Niners won their final 6 games and got Young back just in time for their season finale, but their 10-6 record didn't cut it. Who knows what could have been? Before we go, we have to give a shout out to the 1967 Colts. Only 4 teams made the playoffs in that era, and it's wild to think that MVP Johnny Unitas didn't even get a crack at Super Bowl number 2. Baltimore beat the champion Packers and the near-champion Cowboys, entering the final week at 11-0-2, but they were blindsided by the Rams, who swept up the division title in Week 14. A 1-loss season wasn't enough to make the playoffs.
Playoffs? I just hope we can win a game.